So we've been in this series called Live Sent, this conversation where we've been intentional, we've been hungry to allow God to build us and to kind of equip us to grow in our ability to be more open about our faith, to share our faith, to encourage people to walk with Jesus, and how we can kind of grow in our capacity to witness, to share our faith, to be open, all those things that if you've been in the church world for a while, you've heard all these terms, evangelize, right? But how can we begin to really strap onto our life, and how can we begin to put on this kind of character, this mindset that is simply saying, Lord, use me. Use me. I am an arrow that has been shot out into the world. Father, you're the one who guides me wherever I go. And we have this kind of this habit in our Christian language where often we're in discipleship groups, we're in discipleship conversation, or even we're in church on Sunday, and we have this habit where whenever we talk about one of those things that we ought to be doing, usually our initial response is, oh, I gotta be better at that. I gotta do better at that. And so we talk about reading our Bible more, praying more, like, oh yeah, I gotta do that more. I gotta do this more. And so as we talk about sharing our faith, it's not just this idea of, oh, I gotta do this. I gotta add one more thing to how to be a good Christian to the list. But it's this shift of like who we are. Like who God is making us to become. That we live sent into the world. And so as we've walked through this series, we've been following the life and the ministry of two gentlemen in the Old Testament, Elijah and Elisha. We've been reading all about their stories in our small groups as we've tracked this series, and it's been a great conversation. And just to kind of bring us up to speed, because this is week 5 of a 6-week conversation. It's the next Sunday will be the last Sunday that we're in this journey together. But just to kind of refresh ourselves, because today is kind of where a lot of it begins to form ahead, to come to conclusion. Today is actually going to be one of the most practical conversations we have in this entire series. And so I hope you put on your school uniform as we come together to allow God to really teach us some things so we feel even more equipped and more ready to have spiritual conversations. But let me kind of recap for us. Remember several weeks ago in the first week of this series, we talked about the reality that we have been brought into the world as rescuers. We've been brought as rescuers. We're the people of God. As the world calls out for help, as the world even looks to the Christians and says, if bad things are happening and you say that your God is so good, why is he not doing anything? The reality is that is where we come into the story. That is why God brought humanity. That's why he brought the church, why Christ created the church, his body, empowered and filled with his spirit, to be that goodness, to be the rescuer in the world. Not that we would walk around and just save and redeem people like Christ did, but we would be people who are like receptionists in a doctor's office to say, oh, don't worry, I'll help you get an appointment with him. Let me help you get seen by him. That is our role in the world. That was week number 1. Week number 2, we leaned into this reality that as we kind of embrace this mindset, there's this spiritual interest that happens inside of people. I use the illustration of fishing, and I talked about how all of us, even in our life, we have this bobber that begins to wiggle. Where kind of like when we're fishing, not always is the bobber wiggling, not always is there a fish coming to bite our hook. But we get to embrace this mindset where we start to take notice of when our children, when people in our life are beginning to wonder about God. And we see the bobber go like this. Because we wrestle with the reality that people who feel like they don't need help don't need God. And so how can we kind of become wiser and create a better vision as we see into the world? We see people, and we see when people's bobbers begin to wiggle in their hearts. We talked about in week number 3 how we got to begin to embrace this reality that God has brought us into the world to be direct and to bring his truth, that perhaps for too long we've been allowing our politeness to rob people of God's grace, God's redeeming word. And so when we have conversations with people and they believe that any way is a good way to live, that any way is a good way to get to heaven, and we just say, oh, okay, yeah, good luck, and we don't have an intentional moment of not being a bulldozer, of not demeaning and degrading people in those moments. We've developed this mindset that we don't need to be the one who steps in, and we'll talk more, especially today, about what that looks like. But we've lost our sense of boldness, of having a little bit of courage to ask people questions about faith and to help kind of get their antenna aligned with God. And so we've lost that, but we've especially been eager to re-embrace it this morning. As again, like I said, we'll be pretty intentional through that, but what that looks like. So just hang on for a minute. And then last week we talked about this reality that all of this is couched and birthed out of a life that reflects the heart and love of Jesus. That spiritual leadership, that spiritual influence on people around us, all of it is a springboard out of our life that reflects Christ and how we serve and how we care for people. We talked about how God gave us these two commands, how Jesus said, love me with every bit of who you are and love others as yourself. And the reality is that it is the second greatest command that gives evidence for the first. And our children, people around us, are looking for that. And so we can't just step into a moment of talking with them about faith, but yet for some reason our whole life, or even the most recent bit of our life, we've been living completely different, and we've been not really loving and selfless as God is calling us to. Good stuff that we've talked about. But today we get to lean into a special moment in 2 Kings chapter 5, this powerful moment where Elisha is used by God to bring healing to a man named Naaman. We read about him in our small groups this last week, and I've been eager to dive more into his story. And so if you would with me, go ahead and grab out your Bible, your smartphone, or whatever you have with you, or if you brought it, maybe like a stone tablet that has it chiseled out for 2 Kings chapter 5, whatever it looks like for you. But it'll also, of course, be here on the screen, so don't worry if you forgot the chisel at home. It's there for you as well. But as we lean into the Word, I really hope as we lean into the story that we especially get to be developed and grown by God, and how we really get to help people. How He's really bring hope and truth and love and grace into their life. So 2 Kings chapter 5, it tells us the story of a man named Naaman. I'm going to read a good bit of his story together. So starting at verse 1, it says, Now Naaman was a commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram, and he was a valiant soldier. But he had leprosy. He was a man, I pause for a moment and say, he was a man that everyone looked up to. He was a man of great accomplishment, of great optimism, a man of great vision, a man that God really allowed victory upon. And so he was a man that many, many, many people admired. But he had leprosy. As he'd go into meetings with his generals, he'd wear a covering on his arm. As he'd go out into the battlefield, he would cover himself as not for people to really see what was happening in his life. And so while many people saw him as a man of great accomplishment, truly behind the scenes, he was a man of great agony. A man who had asked for many years, why me? A man who was just wondering, what would God have to do with me? Verse 2. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. She's talking about Elisha right now. Verse 4, Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, go, the king of Aram said. that he replied, I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. Oh my goodness, this guy's packing so much. And the letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he was trying to pick a quarrel with me. Why is he trying to tear me down? Why is he trying to humiliate me? Why is he trying to embarrass me? But then Elisha steps in. Verse 8, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him. Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. And not Abana and Pharpar and the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? I mean, couldn't I wash and Naaman be cleansed? And so he turned and he went off in a rage. In verse 13, it says, and Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times. And as the man of God had told him, his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Could you even imagine what that moment was like for Naaman? You see, what is remarkable in this story is that we kind of see through a series of people, Naaman walks along this kind of short journey to being healed, being redeemed. And as you continue to read through his story, which we won't, which we did in our groups, but you'll see that later on he just falls and he worships God, and it's a rather remarkable thing what happens in his life and in his heart. But you see what's remarkable is that in Naaman's story we see these kind of 3 very intentional different people, kind of like stepping stones in his life that all lead him along to God. And you see, what's really amazing is that these 3 people tend to be 3 different kind of people that we get to be, that we can put hats on and get to be in the world that God can use to begin to help others along towards him. 3 different types of kind of approaches, 3 different types of kind of people. I'm not talking about personalities where we're jumping from happy and sad and jumping like that, but this type of approach, this type of mindset, these types of conversations that we have with people that God will use, that God has used and will continue to use to help usher the world along to him. And I really believe, church, as we walk through these 3 different types of people, as we embrace and we learn what they did and the skills they had and the intentionality they had, the focuses they had, that we even ourselves would find confidence, would find a sense of, I can do this. I can do this. I believe in myself. I really think that God could use me in this kind of way to help my student, to help my family member, to help my coworkers, to help my classmates, to help people on my sports team, for God to really use me. Let's point them to him. And you see, I want to say a few prefaces before we dive into the 3. I want to mention 2 very important things. These people are not sequential. So it's not A, B, C. And even for ourselves, we kind of don't really know what order the sequence we come in, but as we approach conversations with people, we kind of can have a kind of a sense of wisdom and discernment to know, okay, which hat should I wear in this moment as we talk to people. So they're not necessarily chronological. We aren't necessarily, it's the second thing, we aren't necessarily every person, all three of these, to every person we talk with. Sometimes we are, but sometimes we are not. And again, using our own sense of discernment, our own sense of wisdom to kind of gauge the moment, seeing which person do I need to be right now as I lead my student, as I lead, again, all these people around me. So enough being said, let's dive into who these three different people are. The first one we actually see in the servant girl. This moment where she sees Naaman's ailment and then simply points him to Elisha. And so I call this first person the pointer. The pointer. I always loved when I'd walk into a hardware store, I'd walk into especially an Ace hardware store, and there'd be a gentleman or a woman there right after you walk through the entrance. They'd have a red vest and an earpiece on, and they'd ask you, hey, good morning, or hey, good afternoon, what are you looking for? And I'm like, some paint, some nuts and bolts. And they'd say, aisle 2. Oh, that's aisle 6. No, that's right over there in the store. You're going to find it kind of 3/4 down and halfway in the middle or down towards the bottom shelf. They know. And you see, I call this person the pointer because, like the girl in this moment, she finds this moment of really seeing the hunger, seeing the bobber wiggle in Naaman and his wife's heart, and she simply points him to Elisha. And understand that this is kind of a baseline. This is kind of a hat that we wear all of the time. Not that every word that comes out of our mouth should be, just go to God, or go to God, go to God. But that we would see moments and we simply always respond with, God is there for you. These small, little moments of, God cares for you. Oh my word, does he love you? You don't have to fight through this life all by yourself. God wants to walk all of it through with you. These small, brief moments, and we kind of can discern the moment because it will be brief. It will be quick. It's going to be like we're checking out in the grocery store. We kind of have a brief conversation with the lady or the gentleman behind we can't really tell them all of our life story. We can't talk through all of our deep beliefs or theological differences. We just have this brief moment. And in the same kind of way, when we understand that there are so many moments in the world where we get to be the pointer in people's lives. Not deep, not crazy spiritual, not over the top. But in these moments, we allow God to use us as a beacon, as a lighthouse. And we simply get to invite people to church. We get to have these little moments of sprinkling God's love on them. And sometimes these moments can extend into one of the other two people we'll get to. But again, these are usually moments that are brief, and they're usually moments with people. They're usually moments with people who have closed the door to wanting to hear anything we have to say. Because you have people like that in your life. Maybe those people just turned 15 years old. Maybe these people are lifelong friends. Maybe these people are relatives. But they're not all that interested in any deeper things that you have to say. And so what's so important about the pointer is that much like the servant girl, we know that it's our job to point them to others who will have the two other kinds of conversations that we'll get to in a minute. That is both our role to point them to God, but also point them to a pastor, to another friend, to a book, to a song, to a scripture. We simply get to point them in a direction where they can then encounter people of B and C. And so we get to invite people again to church. We get to invite them into Christian community. We get to see our teens go to youth group. Even though they're fighting or struggling, we still get to invite them that way so they would be around adults who get to be that B and C person. We get to bring people along with us so they can be in conversations with the people that we aren't allowed to be in their life. Does that make sense? And so that is the pointer. And what's also very important, too, to understand about this person, and this is almost a sense of urgency inside of us, realize that there are so many other things and people in the world pointing people other directions. The very king of Aram points Naaman to another king. Even though the servant girl told him about Elisha, he's still went somewhere else. Understand this urgency that people aren't just going to kind of stumble their way into God, but we see ourselves in the moment, and we get to really be a directional sign. We get to kind of be a kind of a dead end, but left or right type of person. And we get to be that pointer and just say, you know what? I bet you'd really find what you're looking for in Christian community. I bet you'd find it in Jesus if you would let God be with you. Understand, and this is also very crucial about being the pointer, is that people are looking at us to see if we actually have that red vest and that earpiece on. Because imagine how silly it would be to walk into an Ace Hardware or walk into a hardware store and some random person with a poncho on and a pair of Crocs says, oh yeah, aisle 3. And you're like, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not going to listen to you. I'll find out my own. Thank you. It's important as a pointer. Not that we be perfect people. The world yells at us as Christians saying that we're judgmental, that we're hypocrites, but we never claim to be perfect. The reality is, though, is especially as people who wear this baseline of a hat, that we be intentional reflecting Jesus and showing our uniform to the world. Then, as Naaman goes along, he, of course, as we read, runs into Elisha. And what's wonderful about his interaction with Elisha is that Elisha gives him a statement. He gives him a set of instructions that actually make him angry, and is completely different than what Naaman expected it to be. Elisha in this moment He challenged Naaman's perception of who God actually is. So I like to call the second person the challenger. That we would step into the ring as an MMA fighter and just, I'm just kidding. But I call this person the challenger. Not that they're a person who is stubborn, or not that they're a person who is very difficult to deal with or converse with. But we understand in the moment that it is our job to simply ask questions that provoke some critical thinking about faith. While the pointer puts God and Christian faith on people's radar, the challenger's motive, the challenger's target on the wall is to make them think in their mind about what they believe to be true, and especially what they believe about God. These are usually the best conversations that we have over coffee, or we have when we're sitting face to face, or we have when we're able to have an extended period of time. These are not quickly checking out at the grocery store moments of conversing. But you see, as the challenger, it is our great responsibility simply to ask questions or to put ideas out there that begin to get people to think. And so we simply begin to ask people, for example, when we're talking to someone who is not a Christian, we can simply ask them, so what do you believe about God? Nothing harmful, nothing insane, nothing over the edge, nothing that's like really pushy. We just ask, what do you believe about God? It's one of my favorite questions to ask people, because I'm trying to uncover where they're at in their life and what they believe, again, about God, or what kind of belief they have, or whatever kind of faith, or if they're not even, if they claim not to be a person in another religion in the world, but to say, hey, I'm an atheist, or whatever they would believe about themselves or the world. But still, we ask this question: what do you believe about God? What do you believe about the Christian faith? What do you think is confusing, or doesn't make sense about the Christian faith? One of my favorites is, and it usually gets a chuckle when I ask it, what do you think is stupid about what I believe? Now be careful, because we're loading a gun and we're allowing someone to shoot at us. And now this is good, and I'll explain why in a minute. But make sure that you have enough strength, enough confidence in yourself, and believe me when I say you have a whole lot more than you think that you do. But I urge you, when you ask these questions, because what happens in the mind of someone is that throughout their life, they've been silenced by every other Christian before you. They come into a moment when they're talking to a coworker and they believe differently. And they're like, oh, I don't believe that. The Bible doesn't say that. No, you're wrong. My pastor says different. And so as Christians, we've shot ourselves in the foot by slamming the door on people when they begin to share their beliefs. But may we be the stronger ones who are willing to listen and then just ask some more questions. Why do you believe that? That is interesting. I've never heard of that before. That's so neat. Tell me more about this. Tell me more about why you believe that to be true. I'm intrigued by this. People have never had a Christian act that way to them. And so when you act that way to them, it throws them off guard. Now that we're running into moments and we're battling people around, like we step into the MMA cage and we're going to knock them down. But no, we step in and simply have an eager heart to listen and to ask questions and to understand about people. Because what will happen is that as you hear from people, you get to ask them questions, and they'll usually begin to ask you questions as well. And so they'll bring something up, in the Bible, it has all these contradictions, and you're like, it does? Like what? I don't know. We should research that together. Why don't we sit down during our breaks and read the Bible and we see what kind of contradictions we can find? What happens is it begins to pave the way for greater discussion of beginning to talk through the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of our faith. Because people will have a very hard time beginning to believe in a Christ, believe in the Word of God, if they have all of these presuppositions, they have all of these roadblocks in their mind that have not been properly talked through. And so I urge you, just simply ask, well, what do you think about this? And when somebody asks you a question, like, is this really true? Like when you ask people, what's confusing about the Christian faith, and they say something, and they're like, is that right? Like, do you really believe that? Well, you have a great moment of saying, you know what, I don't believe that either. Because there are a lot of people who are very construed. There's all sorts of YouTube channels and websites. That's one of the very bad things about the internet, is that there's a whole lot of information that's just... So people have read all these podcasts, or read all these blogs, they've read all this stuff that really is bizarre, telling them what is true about our faith. And we can just sit in a moment and say, I don't think that's right, but can we find it out together? Wonderful time of discussing. Wonderful time. I remember many years ago I had a friend, when I was working at Lowe's in college, I got to have a friend who came in, a gentleman who we weren't friends at the time, but he came in, his name was Kaya. He had just moved to the States from Turkey. He lived in Istanbul, and he had grown up his entire life as a Muslim. I remember that day he rode his motorcycle to the store. He bought some things, couldn't take it back, and so I'm like, hey, I get off work in 5 minutes. I'll throw up my pickup truck, and we'll bring it over to your house. And then began a friendship where we would hang out. We'd sometimes remodel his house. Sometimes we'd grab lunch. And I would ask him questions about the Quran. I'd ask him questions about his faith. And he would ask questions about me, about the Christian faith. And what happened is that it came to a stance when he actually said, you know what, I don't really think that everything we've been taught is right. I never got to lead him in a moment of giving himself to Christ, but I certainly got to be used by God to ask him these questions, and I got to go check out of the library a Quran translated into English. That way I could read it and I could ask him questions about it. I read that in the Quran it talks about Jesus being the bread of life. You know he's called that in the Bible. You know in the Quran it talks about how people should listen to the Gospels. What does that mean? I really believe that even though our paths separated years ago, that God allowed me to be the challenger who helped him process through his faith, what he believed about God, about even Christians. And I prayerfully hope and believe that someone else came behind me to lead in God. Well, understand as a challenger is our simple goal just to ask questions and to learn. And allow God to use us there on after. The third person we see is that after Naaman left from Elisha, as he ran off in a rage, his servants came along and said, I thought you really wanted to be healed. I mean, if he would have told you something different, wouldn't you have done it? And so what's beautiful in this moment is that the servants be an usher of leading their master, who they call Father, who they have such great love for, leading him to God. And so I call this third person the Affirmer. You see, while the challenger stimulates the mind, the Affirmer does the same with the heart. Because the reality is that people won't want to walk with Jesus if they don't feel like it. Not that we play emotions or that we tug on people's heartstrings, but we simply get to ask them, much like the servants, what are you really trying to find? Aren't you really wanting that peace in your life? We need to be the person who focuses on the heart of the individual and simply ask, what are you living for? Like, are you just here to work a 9 to 5? To live the American dream? To build up a giant retirement portfolio, then retire and have all the fun in the world? Is that really and then die? That's your lifelong plan? That's why you're here? What if there was more? What if you were made not by a process of millions of years of forming from one animal to the next, but what if you were made by a creator? And what if you were made in his image and he loves you? And he wants you to be with him. He wants to be your friend. Because in the Bible, he doesn't hold this overarching idea that I'm this king up on a throne and you must be my servants and my peasants. He calls himself a father. And he wants to call us his children. You see, the aim of the third person is to help them really encounter a love for God. Imagine how the world would be different if we began to put on these hats and we began to be intentional at wherever we're at in life. We can put on these hats and say, you know what, I'm going to step out, I'm going to be bold, I'm going to ask some questions, I'm going to encourage people, I'm going to tell them about God, I'm going to allow God to use me just to lead people to him. Imagine. Here in a moment, Aaron and the team will come and lead us in the last song. And as they come, I want to share you one more story. You see, many, many years ago, when I first moved to South Carolina, I was in college. I got a job at Lowe's. And there's hardware stores all throughout this story. But anyway, I got a job. And I remember my first day, I became friends with a gentleman named Jason. And the first day when I met him, he told me, after some, talking for a while, he learned that I was a Christian, and he made it right apparent that he wasn't. But he reassured me that he was a good person, and I'm like, I believe you absolutely are. But you see, after many, many months of talking, many months of doing these things, of sitting in the big break room together and just asking questions about what he believes, many months of being the challenger, not a bulldozer, not some aggressive type, like you gotta swallow this Christian belief because it's true, but just asking and asking and asking. I had the beautiful moment of getting to remind him, oh my goodness, does God care for you? I remember one day I invited him to a worship service that I got to preach at, and he was there. I can't believe he showed up. I remember in the room in that moment, I simply gave the invitation for people to accept Christ. I remember after the moment was over, the team was leading us in worship. I remember I came down back to my seat. I remember he came up behind me, he grabbed me on the shoulder, and he said, you know what, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready. Where I got to lead him in his surrendering his heart to Christ. And I remember that very next day, I saw him back at work in the garden section. And I remember he came to me all excited. He told me that he had led his fiance to Christ that same day, and just how excited he was to journey with God. And even like others I've shared, our paths changed many years ago when we moved down here. But Jason and his wife still email me every now and then. Hey, how are the kids? Hey, how is this? Guess what? We're pregnant again. Just imagine. Imagine the people's lives that you would change if you did this. Imagine coming to the end of your days and seeing the people at your bedside through all the years, the decades of, wow, I remember when we had that horrible job together, but yet we talked through faith and you got pulled closer to Christ, and we get to look around our bedside and we see the faces, and we see the people who we've got to lead to the King. Imagine how wonderful that would be. And so I urge you, as we are but arrows that are sprung into the world, trying to find our way, don't allow life to get the best of you. Don't allow other callings or other purposes to sway you one way or the other. Allow God, the creator of the universe, to guide you. Allow him. Allow him to lead you as you figure life out. Allow him to lead you as you navigate through hardships. Allow him to lead you. And along the way, allow him to lead you in impacting the faith in the hearts of those around you. Because remember, life is short. And there's but one way that we can make the most of it. So how about we let the one who made the arrow tell it where to fly? Can we pray together?